I'm so excited to chat here today with Julia from Breakout Ventures. We met this past year as our All Raise Partners cohort. And so I'm really excited to sit down and chat with you. Julia is the managing partner of Breakout Ventures, as I mentioned. They're a venture firm that funds companies harnessing the power of cells to build solutions in human health and sustainability. She co-founded Breakout Labs after a decade of investing in creative bioscience entrepreneurs with Breakout Labs with the Teal Foundation. Breakout's portfolio has grown leather without the cow, reprogrammed B cells to produce personalized protein therapeutics, and transformed industrial carbon dioxide emissions into really useful products. Julia spent her years as an investor and an operator, navigating the translation of new technologies in life sciences to consumer adoption and scale. She's been investing in and building venture-backed science-driven companies for the past 15 years and has worked with multiple companies from founding through IPO or M&A. Julia, thanks so much for joining me.
Abby, thanks so much for having me. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to kind of just kick off our chat by first, hearing a little bit about Breakout Ventures, your investment focus, and the stages. What are you most interested in today?
Yeah, well, that was a great intro because I think we hit a bunch of the different areas, whether it's healthcare, biology, chemistry, life sciences, pharma. So really, we specialize just like you guys at working at intersections. And this is a great example, your day-to-day of bringing all those intersections together. And that's frankly the most fun part of what we do is taking sort of non-traditional industries and bringing them together. So what we really focus on is what we call creative biosciences. For us, this is really this growing intersection of technology, biology, and chemistry, and the thesis that, as you pointed out, we've really been building and curating over these last 10 years. I was noticing it in the intro. We literally started in 2012 as well. Everyone thought we were crazy, so there's like happy anniversary for everybody. We made it. No one thinks we're completely nuts anymore. But really, over the last 10 years, it was about these enabling tools like computation, genetic sequencing, genetic engineering, automation, and of course, imaging in its multiple forms that have enabled us to not just have more data or more information, but really design new and valuable things on now venture relevant timelines and budgets. So just a quick intro to what that means for us. That means that the most interesting applications for us are in human health. So maybe life sciences broadly, whether it's a drug, a research tool, a diagnostic, as well as what we call sustainability. So a lot of those same underlying tools used in whether it's synthetic biology, but generally kind of materials and ingredients. From a stage perspective, we're early stage investors, and we're very comfortable as you guys are. And I say comfortable in the uncomfortable, that really hairy technical risk. And that typically has us entering at either the seed or that first institutional round, whether you call that a series seed or a series A these days.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I want to get back to that later on in the discussion about like, how do we decide what is a science project versus what is a commercial business, right? But I want to first start out back where, how did you get into like the power of cells? So you started your career on Wall Street covering pharma and healthcare. Did you select those sectors? Because I know you come from like a household of doctors, right? Or did you just like randomly get assigned to these and it piqued your interest so intensely that it became really your life's work?
Yeah, I honestly, I didn't know much about business growing up. As you said, healthcare was really like the family business. There wasn't like an industry choice. That was just where I was headed in one form or another. My version of it, even early on, was sort of an obsession with this growing concept, especially in the 90s, of bioethics. And I studied, that as kind of the implications in science and medicine. And as the daughter of an MD and a PhD, I fully planned on taking that path. And discovered with some mentorship that I am not made for, I'm a super impatient person. And I'm not made for a decade in the lab. And really my world was opened up a little bit to the business side. And it just seemed to really be at a pace that was more like the pace I wanted to see things done. So really going to Wall Street was, a lot of that was, it was in equity research, learning that, that framework for how to think about how to turn some of these early stage technologies that I was really interested in to become profitable companies.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so after a little bit of time looking at like the equity side of things, you moved over into the venture space, right? And from the
Yeah.
venture space, where you were focusing on investing in life sciences companies, you pretty quickly made the jump over to the operating side of things, right? Like you went over to Trivascular. What was the reason behind that jump?
Yeah. So I think the first thing to say, and I think it's like an honor to be in venture, first of all.
Mm.
And I got my first taste of it, for first tour of duty, I guess, 15 years ago. And I think like my first month in, it just like blew my mind. Like I didn't know this was a job. I didn't understand how people were paying me to think for a living and talk to cool people. I was doing biotech and medtech investing, everything from starting new companies to later stage rounds, actually managing some of our public stuff as well. And you really get to work with these just incredibly innovative, passionate people that are doing incredible work. And part of the intro, I mean, the spaces we work with are highly impactful, just, in and of themselves. And so, to be clear, I definitely feel that way 15 years later. I showed up for work this morning. I'm like, yeah, this is great. But really, when I was there, we were doing some structuring of companies as well. One of them was Trivascular. It was a company that we structured that was a novel medical device company developing endovascular grafts. And I kind of always had like one foot in the business side of how we were building that out. And really had the opportunity to move over and build out the commercial side of the business. I had already established I loved venture. I knew I was more likely destined for that seat, to really support the founders versus being one myself. I was pretty self-aware in that way. But I also felt like I really needed to go to the other side, learn the other side, sit on the other side of the table and ask for a lot of money, manage people, to really be helpful or even like baseline empathetic.
Yeah.
And the takeaway, I guess, from that experience is, founders are heroes. It is incredibly difficult, right? And I think it's really helped, a whole new level of respect for those teams and what they go through.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm totally with you on like the venture side of things. I always feel incredibly blessed to be in the position I am where I get to look at so many cool companies. Like even listening to Evan chat through like a bunch of our portfolio companies this morning is just like really inspiring to me because you're working with companies that are looking to improve the way that the world works in one way or another. And it sounds great that at Trivascular you had this opportunity not only to work with them, but to be one of them and to understand what it feels like when you are on that side of the table and building and trying to grow a life sciences company. And then let's see, from there you went over to Stanford for a bit and you started up an innovation program at Stanford. And then you founded Breakout Labs. So it was part of the Thiel Foundation.
Yeah. And let me give you a little bit of like the timeline narrative, because, back to 10 years. So first of all, I should point out that I started investing 15 years ago on the private side, that's like mid 2000s, really interesting innovation, a rich ecosystem. But then, heavily my investing and then operating days were heavily impacted by the recession. And I would say that the part it was impacted by was that I found most meaningful was the sort of evaluation of risk. People just didn't the most interesting things, so in my mind, like all this up and coming technology that was so exciting. We're doing the Human Genome Project and all of these other things that were kind of making this gap that going from academia into commercialization or would be soon was still kind of uninvestable because people really wanted to stick to later stage, less risky things. And so a lot of our origin story at Breakout starts with that mindset. My partner, Lindy Fishburne, was exploring the same dislocation with Peter Thiel, as you mentioned, and I was, they were much more productive than me. I started a drinking group so we could all, drown our sorrows and not doing the fun stuff anymore. And really they brought me in to help build Breakout Labs, within his foundation. So the idea there was that we knew there were interesting technologies and we knew what we want to do from a technology perspective. Again, broadly, this intersection of technology, biology, and chemistry. but we needed to find that line between sort of an academic pursuit and a commercial company. And particularly, where were the commercial partners going to start being interesting? Where are the investors going to start being interested? So we really were like incubating this thesis early on within Peter's Foundation, writing seed checks and everything from very early cell therapies to novel materials to carbon conversion. But we knew if we were right that we would need kind of a longer term vehicle outside of this structure. This was something where we were investing out of a foundation. There was a philanthropic aspect to it of, hey, we can take more risk here than the broader investment market. So really, as the world developed around us and that thesis became a little bit less and less crazy, we created Breakout Ventures as the longer term vehicle, maybe 2016, 17 is really when we started investing and started doing our larger investments there. So call them the Series A rounds, whatever we're calling those bigger rounds these days. Really with a hypothesis now, we've been kind of testing that limit, incubating that thesis, figuring out, where are we hitting those key inflection points and de-risking that, like, we took on this big hairy risk, but we kind of see that path towards commercialization. We see where the partners are, we see where the team is. And the more we invested, the more we were able to hone that investment thesis. We started to bring in commercial partners earlier. We started to see this niche technical expertises that you couldn't hire for. Like now there was 5 years of PhDs graduating with it, and you were starting to see that evolution of the technical talent pool as well. And sadly, frankly, the last couple of years have only accelerated what was a thesis that was already on a fast track. If you think about not only the global pandemic, but as well as climate change, our thesis in kind of this deep tech technologies, I guess that's repetitive, deep tech in science is really playing out faster than we've ever imagined. So I think we've invested in about 65 companies over the last decade, and we've been a board member or board observer on nearly all of them. So there's also a lot of learning to carry over from being sort of deep in it for years and years. And really, and I think we'll talk about the now, but our latest fund, which we announced at the end of last year, is really, okay, we're here. We can be an early stage partner across, seed, Series A, Series B, and now really be that larger early stage platform to work with founders.
It's great. I mean, it's such an interesting journey from what people thought was uninvestable, right? Before proving out that not only are they investable, but they can be incredibly profitable investments as well.
Yeah.
And I've heard you talk about it before about how one of the building blocks behind this idea was just these enabling technologies, which are bringing on a new set of opportunities that are sitting at the intersection of bio and chem. Has there anything that you started out believing about this that wasn't true? What did you dispel in your Breakout Labs days that is now something that you bring forward into Breakout Ventures?
Oh, wow. I don't think so. I think this is maybe the market. This is what the market thought a little bit more than us. And now I hope it's mainstream. But for any of you who are working in technical fields 10, plus years ago, the technical founder in science, the PhD founder and CEO in particular, was, you would see people. I remember even at the beginning of working in venture, there would be the technical founder and then the business typically guy, right? And then the business guy, and they would, and they were a package. And really, I think that there are so many great examples of technical founders, PhD founders in particular, who have over this last decade really stepped up as founders, have really expanded, and that is not rare anymore. And in fact, we have quite a bit of it. We typically have really complementary founding teams, because again, we work at intersections. So no one person is really going to be enough to really understand the breadth of what any of our companies do. But I just think that's really great because they really are the passionate, product focused, science focused person, and seeing the support for that and the successes there has been really, really important, I think, for our industry.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And we feel a lot the same way, right? Like that deep technical skill, especially when you're in such industries that require it from an innovation side of things, that can be, you know, somewhat of a secret sauce, right? For people who are coming to the table, and something that we absolutely filter and look for and screen for, and all of the companies that we invest in. And so it's cool to hear that that's, something that you guys are taking forward into your second fund. You just raised what? You announced the raise of a $112 million fund in December.
Yeah,
Congrats.
yeah, thanks.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
and I guess it's, this one is the fund, a little bit about that history, right? We incubated within Teal. We really kind of were running in parallel our seed effort and our kind of AB effort. And this really is those two worlds together. So we really talk about it as being kind of purpose made. As other venture investors, right? We're the first LPs in our fund. And
Yeah.
so we really thought about, like, how are we going to design this for success? How do we take the best of what we've learned being in the trenches, and how do we make that and really double down on being like the best partner we can be for these type of founders. And especially since, you could kind of tell by the point I just made about technical CEOs, but I think more generally, we have doubled down on the talent in the market right now, in the sense that, some of our industry has gone towards company creation, which I think is really amazing. And there's some fantastic companies made that way. But there's so many talented people who have been part, technical, but part of a commercial enterprise over the last, 5 years, have seen it, have maybe are on their second or third company now. There's just been so much acceleration that we really want to say, okay, so how are we a good partner for them through multiple phases? We're not just a C player. We're kind of at bridge also to the A. We can be a partner there. We can start even making those intros towards exit. And I think that, that's been the most fun part about designing the second fund and now starting to invest it.
That's fantastic. Yeah, we talk a lot about that with founders. It's not just about like the today and the fundraising process today, but what are you going to achieve over the next 12 to 18 months to set you up for success the next time around. And in looking with these deep technical founders, sometimes serial entrepreneurs or people who've been involved in different commercial enterprises for a while, what are some of the other things that you're looking for around here that you think is going to set creative bioscience apart from all other industries as you move forward through the next 10 years? What are some of the very specific examples of sectors or use cases that you're most intrigued by at the moment?
Yeah, I think it really, let me give some examples here. I think you hit on it when we talk about the enabling technologies being part of the differentiator. And sometimes you don't always see the enabling technologies in the final product. So sometimes you'll see us in what looks like on the outside a very traditional drug company, but sort of the powerhouse, inside is like heavy biomarker, heavy, data-driven discovery work, something to that extent. But I really do think that if we think about, where does our thesis shine? It's kind of like, where do you take that build, test, learn, that traditional like build, test, learn cycle, and really think about those enabling tools as like a build, test, learn, design, do it fast, like as fast as possible, and really take that cost and timeline down. And so a lot of times that is also at intersections where we shine. A couple of examples where our thesis comes into play. So Checker Spot, one of our synthetic biology companies, it's leveraging like advanced genomics and other biotech derived tools. They actually, a lot of folks in the materials and ingredients market like trained in the biotech market because some of the technologies went there first. That really helped them design and manufacture tools for better performance, and in this case, actually more sustainable biourethanes and things like that. So those are for industrial and consumer products. And I won't go too far into it, but if anyone's into backcountry skiing, they actually make their own backcountry skis out of this microalgae, cool. Essentially. So they're lighter, they're they're more shock absorbent, all these things. I'm headed to the design center in Salt Lake City today. And then if you take another look at a couple of areas of like recent investments that I think are probably good examples of like, how is this a little bit different than maybe traditional life sciences or something to that extent. I think something that uses the imaging example is, a recent seed investment we did that's really dynamic single cell analysis. You're analyzing thousands of videos of single cells simultaneously, turning live cell imaging into high throughput science. And that's really helping like drug developers understand, what's the characterization or like the quality and the efficacy of some of these, especially cell-based therapies. Another one that often blows people's minds, and it's kind of a fun, and we're still crazy on this point. It's a seed we just closed, but we haven't announced yet, is the company doing digital olfaction. And so we don't know how to digitize scent really yet. It's the most difficult sense to digitize. And we've really been looking at it for 5 years. How do you take animal tissue and put it on a chip and then make that commercial? And it was hard to scale. And so this is actually a company doing a neural implant into animals. And essentially another example of turning kind of the physical into data, sitting between the olfactory receptor and the olfactory bulb to take that electrical signal, throw it into the cloud, into an ML model, and tell you like, is that a bomb? Is that COVID? Is that coffee? Right.
Yeah.
So that's another example that's a little bit different when you talk about creative biosciences.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I love that because it seems like it kind of cross-cuts a variety of things. And so while you do talk about it in the life sciences portion, right, like the impact also though is on everything down to like materials science, like skis, right, like improving performance of skis and making them more sustainable. Like, and I know that when we were talking a bit in prepping for this, we talked about how, the past, I don't know, half century has really been based on petroleum products. And one of the big things that you're excited about is how new creative bioscience and computational design are enabling new forms of building blocks for materials. And I thought that sounded super interesting to me. Do you see, do you think that there is a lot happening at the intersection of creative biosciences and visual tech today?
To be clear, so the biosciences and visual tech, or on the material science side of that in particular?
Any of them, right? Like on material sciences and visual tech, on biosciences and visual tech. I mean, I kind of see them all like
absolutely. And I think I might like sort of tell a little bit of that narrative of maybe like how I think about, visual technology. And a lot of times that's, microscopy or computer vision or something like that in our world. And really a lot of it is going to start on the life sciences, healthcare side. And then those same tools, as I was kind of giving the example of checker spot, really move into maybe the synthetic biology, materials, ingredients world as well. And I can have some examples there, but I think the way that I would like frame it, and you all know this well, given that you've invested in this space, the history of imaging in healthcare is vast. We've been, all of us think about our experience in healthcare, right? You get an X-ray of a broken arm, you get an ultrasound of a baby. Again, you're turning physical information into data, and we've gotten really good at it. We've actually been pretty good at it for a while. I used to cover some of the radiology information systems, right? Like 20 years ago, those were already robust data sets. 15 years ago, I was doing MRI guided radiotherapy for cancer, right? So those have actually been where there's been a lot of the innovation, but really from a resolution standpoint, radiological imaging, things like that, maybe you're at the micrometer or the millimeter scale. And part of what's interesting now, even though that is still interesting and still an interesting set of data, especially as we work with computation and how those overlays with other data sets. But what we see is really interesting these days is like, okay, so what can't you see with the human eye, and what can we do with that? So let's talk about the nanometer scale. All of us learned how to use a microscope at some point, that gave us better resolution, better visualization. Yeah, I don't know. I hope we did. American school system, I hope, pulled through on that one. But if you think about like the electron microscope, like electrons as a source of illumination to really start getting to that higher resolution, which frankly we've had. I'm probably not going to get my history right, but I know most of the 1900s we had that data, that information. And so when you add in, I think what's happening in our area right now, especially within, like, let's call it deep tech bio generally, is you're able to add in this level of computation that makes it really interesting. And of course, that visual data has been around, but we didn't have that computation factor or power really until the last decade or so. So we have the information, what can we do with it? So now we can say, as both imaging and computation are getting better, what question would you or could you ask? And we can start looking at things on a cellular level and how things behave dynamically. And in our world, you might get into the omics world, which is the omics space. It's like the rise of genomics, proteomics, transcriptomics, and others is really possible because it's ability to bring multiple data sets together. So how do you bring a visual data set in line with a genetic data set, right? And you can really start to attempt
a fusion of all of them.
Exactly. So like that's where you start to get, this like characterization and quantification of different aspects of biology, looking at, temporal, spatial, like how everything interacts.
Yeah. Very cool. And so, if you had a piece of advice for entrepreneurs who are building something in this space today, what would that number one piece of advice be?
Something that we talk a lot about, it's kind of like the secret working with technical founders is, especially if you're coming out of academia, which frankly, not everyone does these days. A lot of people are coming from industry and starting companies because they see the problem, still in technical roles. But I think oftentimes your focus is on taking on big technical risks. And you really need to think about, so in early stage, all the risk is still ahead of you. So not just technical risk, but like financing risk and commercial risk and team risk and everything else. That story is still to be written. So we specialize in that big, hairy technical risk, but we don't want you taking on in all buckets, right? That's going to be a lot harder. And so really some of the advice that we talk through is saying, okay, well, let's think about, so sometimes we even talk about if we're going to take that kind of hairy technical risk, we don't want to take market risk. So in other words, it'll be tough to make, but if we make it, we know someone's there for it. We know there's a customer, a buyer, a value in the market. And so I think really that shift in mindset of, especially if you're coming out of academia where, you're trying to solve the hardest problems, it's like, okay, hardest problems, but step one so that we can actually commercialize it and not take on all those risks at once.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it seems like, going back to that initial question that we said, is this a science experiment or is there real commercial opportunity associated with it? What's something that you look at in order to determine, yes, there is market risk or no, there is not market risk, since we want to take it from a technical side of things?
I think it's so one thing I'd say about market risk that's kind of interesting, like our internal joke is like, if there's a white paper on it, it's probably not for us. So when we talk about market risk, we don't necessarily mean like, hey, come to us with a model of, this is the sales per year and these are the players and all of that. It's that you're building something that's like inherently valuable. And so really what we look at is, and, spending a lot of time in this space, for example, we might have the experience ourselves of bottlenecks. We've tried to scale a company and we've been like, oh man, it'd be so great if we had. And that is really an example of something where then you can go back and look at, there may not be a quote unquote market there, but we know it's a problem that is, we always talk about internally, who has deep pockets and urgent needs. Because that's really, how we define market a little bit more than, is there a market report there?
Absolutely. That makes a ton of sense. And I love that, like just looking for things that actually have inherent value to business and society as one of the critical components to the things that are coming across your doorstep. Julia, thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. It
Yeah.
was really, really interesting to learn more about all the remarkable companies that you're investing in and the technologies that you're looking at Breakout Ventures. Thank you for joining me today.
Absolutely, Abby. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And I think Julia will be hanging out for another couple of minutes. If anybody in the audience wants to chat at her, send her a DM. I'll sound like Gen Z. Thanks again.
Thanks.